So, yes.
So I just had a couple of questions. I just wanted to, I've always kind of wondered about a number of things. And I don't know, I guess the first thing I've always wondered is, how you guys originally met.
I was 15. It was the day before he was going into the service. I was at the Seneca City line, and a mutual friend was stopped at Birch and Seneca Street and said, "If I come to school tomorrow, will you give me a kiss?" And he leaned over and he said, "Yes. And if I come tomorrow, would you give me a kiss?" And I said, "Who said that?" Real snippy, you know. They didn't come back the next day, so I didn't see him again until after he came home from the service. And then his buddy had been killed. I was working at Honeyland, at the ice cream parlor. And he came in, and then he used to take Bill Middleton flying. And Bill worked with me at Honeyland, within my grade in school. And we just talked. And he was engaged with somebody else at first. But that didn't pan out. And we went roller skating, and I didn't go with him, but I went with some other girls. And Bill fixed it so that they would be there also. So that was January 4th, and he asked if he could take me home. And I saw him every night after that.
And she sat way over on the other side of the car, too.
I mean,
she heard about me.
So
he was a lot older.
I don't want to. So, Grandpa, you were engaged before. I never knew that.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Something happened during the war.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to be engaged.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay.
We had gone together before I went in, and then drifted apart. And then when I got in, I guess we
I don't know.
got pretty acquainted.
How old were you when you enlisted?
Well, let's see, it was in 1942. So let's see, I was born in 24 and 35. I was, 19? Right?
You're putting me down to 14 then.
Huh?
You're putting me down to 14.
No, I mean, when I went in.
I don't know.
I went in inactive reserve. Okay.
Okay.
And the reason we got into it, I had two other buddies, close friends, and Harvey came home one night, and John was the other fellow, my friend. The three of us were together. He said, "Well, I'm going to become a pilot in the Air Force." So John and I said, "Geez, if he could do it, we ought to be able to do it." So the next day, we both took off from work. John worked for Bell Aircraft, and I worked for a paper house company where we built machinery, Holbert Machine Company. So we went down to the post office downtown. We took an exam, and we ended up passing that. And we were taken in inactive reserves in October of 42. And then in January of 43, both John and I got called to active duty. Harvey didn't get called until March. And then John and I, we both went to Atlantic City. That's where we took basic training. We lived in a Hotel Traymore. I was in Hotel Traymore. He was in another hotel down the way. And they went through basic training, and then you took all kinds of examinations every night after being outside for, basic stuff, for doing exercise and getting all your shots and all that. Then at night they take you down and put you through more examinations. So eventually, when that got done, I got sent up to college, Colby College in Waterville, Maine. John went to a college in Vermont. Harvey never got called into service till March, and eventually he washed out of pilot training, and he ended up a bombardier. He was killed in 1944, and I think in about July, if I remember right.
What's a bombardier?
He was the one that would drop the bombs. He flew in B-17s as a bombardier, and I was told, I believe it was around Munich, where his plane was shot down, and they told me he died in the arms of a German soldier that got him out of the plane. It was probably burning, I'm not sure. Oh.
And this was John, your friend John?
That was Harvey.
Well,
Harvey. That was Harvey.
Harvey Delward and John Kester were his friends.
Yeah.
And when you met, I think I remember, and this is interesting to me just because of where I grew up. When your friend came up to you and your other friend and said that that he had enlisted, you were on Birch and Seneca too. Is that the same?
No,
Where
no,
do you remember
no.
where that conversation
No.
happened?
You would have been near your house when Harvey told you that he enlisted.
Yeah, so one evening right near our homes.
Okay.
And because we always went out together, the three of us. From high school, we were close friends. You know. Then John went up. He became a P-51 pilot. And he even shot down one German plane. And then I think it was in January of '45 when he was strafing an airfield over in Germany and his plane got hit. And he ended up crashing in a small town, was killed in the crash. So that wiped the two of them out. That always bothered me.
That was the second time he was shot down.
Oh, no, he wasn't shot down before. No, he ran out of gas.
Whatever, the French underground got him back the first.
Yeah, he had his wingman ran out of gas coming back to England from France, and he landed along the shores in France and ditched their planes there. And there was a French, I don't know whether he was a count or what, he had a big estate there. He come out and got him in and hit him. And then he got him and worked them through the underground. And eventually they had to walk all the way in the mountains down into Portugal. And then from Portugal they sent him back to England. And they wanted to send him home as an instructor. And John just said no, he wanted to stay on. So he did, he stayed on, and then he was killed not much too longer in that strafing mission over Germany. So I lost two of my closest friends. That still bothers me.
No, it was tough. But their mothers were so great. You know, Mrs. Custer, especially if we ever went out to see her, oh, she would be so happy to see him because they had been good friends. It was hard.
And Harvey's mother, too.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know Mrs. Dower did much.
No, they were not.
She was a nice lady. I knew her, but not. We had a victory garden at Custer's house out on East and West Road during the war. And my father was their insurance man for years and years, and it all, the little circle, you know, vicious circle, different than today. You're very close-knit at that time.
Grandma, I didn't know, but from reading Grandpa's letter yesterday, I don't mean to ask, like, intrusive questions. You also had a brother who was killed in World War II?
My brother was killed. He was a B-17 bombardier. He was killed on his first mission. The plane blew up and no parachute, no sight of any survivors. And he had just gotten over to England at the time. My mom thought it was a permanent address when she got the telegram. That was horrible.
His pilot was scheduled to fly, and he volunteered to go as pilot. On that first, usually when you first went over, a pilot would fly as a co-pilot for a couple of missions to get the lay of the land, how things were, and how you flew, and formation flying, and all that. And so her brother had volunteered to go as a bombardier in that mission. And at that time, when they went over, you were losing probably.
Well, they didn't have the extra protection.
Formation, you lose 8 or 10 planes in a group. I mean, it was terrible. The German fighters were so thick, and between that and the anti-aircraft, it was tough. When I went over, I was later in the war, in late '44. It was a lot better. We had better fighter cover, things like that.
But my brother stayed on the missing list for 6 years because they had no idea what had happened. And after they began probing into small towns in Germany, near Bremen, they found a list, or people had sighted the plane blowing up in the air, no survivors, no parachutes. And by that time, everything had been accounted for that flew that day. So they assumed that was his plane. My mom never got any remains or anything, that was it. You know. Very difficult for them. He was the first child that survived. He was a wonderful brother.
He was the first child that
survived. They had one other one before him that, you know, died in a few days, which happened many times in those days. And it was tough because he was a wonderful brother and very, very intelligent. He wanted to study plastics after the war. Now, who knew about plastics at that time? And he was great to us, Shirley and Jeanette and I. He was so good. My brother Len. We won't even get into that.
He was a black.
He was different.
He was a good brother.
Right. But,
Bob was, yeah.
oh, wonderful. He didn't know what he wanted to major in, so he went to South Park High School, and he majored in everything available because he wasn't sure. But those are the ones that, unfortunately, you lose young. And I don't think my dad ever got over it, or my mom either. But today it's worse. Today I feel sorry for anyone who has young people over there today.
Oh, in Afghanistan.
Oh. They blow you up without even thinking twice about it, you know. It's awful. I didn't mean to go off on that.
No,
But it is sad. It really is sad. Wars are not good.
Like from taking a look at that, the appendixes to your letter, it seems like you flew. What is it? How many? 30.
Oh, 31.
31 missions.
I always say 30 and a half because we got hit by anti-aircraft. The plane was on fire and we had to bail out.
Okay. Aside from that last one, what were some of the memorable missions that you flew?
Well, one to Berlin. We bombed I think it was Daimler Tank Works in Berlin. That was right in January of '45. No, excuse me, February, I think. I forget. It's January or February. I've lost track. I'd have to look at the list. So you've got a list. But that was the longest mission because that was about 10 hours up and back. That was a long flight.
5 hours there.
Yeah, at least about 8. That's right. Yeah. Most missions lasted, say, could be anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 hours.
Where were you flying out of?
Out of, well, it's Lucera, Italy. It's outside of Foggia. And most of the time when we'd be going up into, say, either Austria, because that's where we did a lot of bombing in Austria and Czechoslovakia more than Germany. We'd always fly up over Yugoslavia, and then there's an area where you could go up to Vienna. We'd bomb a lot of places, oil refineries and things like that, and a lot of railroad yards around Austria, and especially Vienna, and Regensburg, different towns in Austria, and things like that. It was mostly oil refineries and troop trains and things like that we'd go after.
What what was I remember reading in your letter things about flak being thick, and I was just wondering, like, what was your typical flight like? I mean, how did you? Can you take me through maybe what that experience is like flying an airplane?
Well, I was pretty lucky. Most of the time, I had very minor damage. My first 30 flights wasn't much damage. I've had a few holes here and there, and cracked windshield and things like that, but no one was ever injured or hurt. We were only attacked a couple times by German fighters, and they were at a time when they were experimenting with rockets, and they would come up in these Focke-Wulf 190s, I think it was, and they'd come behind you and they'd lift their nose up and they'd shoot a rocket, but they were so erratic, there was no accuracy. We'd sort of laugh, and then we had the black groups from the United States, the first black pilot, they were flying cover for us. And they'd come in and go after them, chase them away. So I had it very easy for the first, I'd say, 30 missions. They weren't bad at all. The last one, we flew right into flak. It was the thickest I had ever seen it. We were all hitting them on fire before we even dropped our bombs. But we stayed with them till we dropped our bombs. Then the minute I did, I peeled out of the formation, but I didn't want to blow up or something and endanger someone else. So we got off the side. We tried to dive and come up and put out the flames. It didn't work. And then when we realized the plane wasn't going to go too far, I put it on autopilot, and we called everyone over the intercom and told them, let's get out. And everyone got out and got out safe. And they all the parachutes worked. They always said, my guy always said, if it don't work, bring it back. So I was lucky. It worked. I landed in a tree, too, and I had to actually pull myself out of it. I was about 1.5 feet off the ground. I had to unhook it to get out, And then I ran up the side of the mountain and hid because I could see them coming up looking for me. They were right out there, the Germans. They didn't waste any time. And civilians were out, too. because most of the crew that were down below me that landed lower in the valley, they got caught practically upon landing. They were right there looking for, watching them come down, I guess. So we were very fortunate.
Just one thing that I had a lingering question about. You had 10 members of your crew. No, I didn't count. How many members?
There was 10.
There was 10.
A crew of 10, yep.
Were half of them British? I don't remember. For something in the letter, it led me to believe that 5 were normal crew members. 5 were people you'd flown with a lot. And then the other 5 were...
Well, they were from other crews. Matter of fact, my co-pilot that day was a young man. Bill Wunderlich was his name. Real nice young fella. He had just got back to our camp maybe a few weeks. He had been shot down over Germany, and they had crash landed in Russia, and he had come back all the way around to Egypt and back. That day he ended up as my co-pilot. Then he ended up in a prison.
Wow. So he got shot down, he returned, and then he went back up.
Yeah, he went back with me. So that day I actually had Bill as the co-pilot, and I think 3 or 4 of the other fellows were regular. The only regular member was my navigator and my engineer and my tail gunner. And so that was 4 of us. The other 6 guys were all... Oh, wait, there was one other one, too. One of the other gunners, yeah. So actually 5 of them were straight. Some of them were almost on their last mission that day. And it ended up their last mission. I know the one fellow, I think his name was Safko or something. It was his last mission to fly, and he got whacked off with it. But we all made it back. And the Germans treated us decently. So we were very fortunate when I read about some of these others.
Now there's also an interesting story after you get into the tree and you cut yourself down. What happened then?
Well, I got on the ground. I heard people coming up there. I was up in the woods on the side of a mountain.
Well, I'm sorry, where did you land?
In Italy, outside of Murano, Italy. And I ran uphill and hid in the bushes, and I watched them go by, and then I ran up further and hid, and then I started walking south till night, and then I slept on the side of the mountain at night. The second night, second day rather, I walked all day till dusk, and then I saw a farmhouse and a barn down in the valley, close, maybe a half mile away, and I decided to go to where the looked like an old farmhouse with chickens and things like that. So I went there, and they fed me and let me sleep there overnight. And they had a barn there, and I slept in the barn. And then the next day, he gave me a suit coat, and I gave him my flight jacket. And then he wanted me to go because that other white farmhouse that was nearby, they were more pro-German. So that day I walked up and through this town of Murano and started heading west. And I was going to try to get towards Switzerland. So I walked all that day, combination between the roads, the railroad tracks, and even up in the mountains a couple of times to get away from things. And then that night I slept in the hayloft of another barn where a man had a farm. Then the next day I continue on, and I was going up this narrow mountain road I had a map, and I knew where I was, so then I was trying to get up near Switzerland, but just when I got up to near the borders where I couldn't see around the corner there, where I saw a gate, and I was trying to figure out what was there, and that's when I went and looked in this corner store at the postcard to see where I was, if they show a picture of that gate, and that's when the German officers saw me and then come over and started questioning me, and I mumbled things in Italian trying to fake it, but he saw my pants and they were Air Corps pants, so I was caught.
That must have been a tense couple of days.
Yeah, lonely days, because I can remember during the day, always when our bombers come up, it was always around noon, and I can remember the next morning laying up in the mountain, and I hear these alarms going off, these different towns as the planes approach, and I see our planes fly over, and I'm looking up and wishing I was up there. But I was glad I was alive down there. I'll tell you. So I can't complain. I come out of it pretty good. Lucky.
You said the Germans were nice to you. How long did you spend in? It would just be like a POW camp. Is that how you best describe it?
No, it was the first night they just put me in a cell by myself. The first night they caught me, they fed me. One German soldier even gave me a knife to cut the bread. And I had that knife for years and lost it somewhere in Buffalo or West Seneca. And I felt bad about that I lost it, because that was a real, memories. And then the next day, they took me to another camp, which was a few cells. I was the only one in there. And then they brought out a list and showed me all these names, and they had all the names of my crew. So I knew they had all made it. They were captured. And then the next day, they took me over where they were. They were in a combination, I'd say it's a combination prison. I think it was a university there that they converted the buildings for prisoners, and they had, I can't remember the exact number, but they had some Polish political prisoners, some French political prisoners, and then they had my crew plus an English crew that somebody caught along the way. So we Americans were kept separate from the other political ones. But then also on the same floor where we were staying, there was also a couple of German prisoners there. One was a German doctor. I don't know what he did at the lines, but he was under arrest. And he had a radio, so every night we listened to radio from Britain and hear what was going on. So that's how we spent our time. And they treat us. We usually get in line with them every day to eat supper. In the morning, they just bring us a couple loaves of bread, and we cut that up and divide it with a little, to give us a meat. We always called it the bread ersatz. We thought they made it with sawdust and something else. It wasn't very good bread, but we survived. But other than that, we'd go up and eat in line with them. We'd follow them through, and they treated us good. And then finally, a day came when, a few days later, they took us all out of that prison. They took all the prisoners out. They were closing that down, and they took us over to this airport. And we went in and bunked with all these soldiers retreating. The German soldiers were retreating at this time. And we bunked right in the same big room with them. And then also during the day there, they'd let us go out with a guard, and we'd walk around. We'd talk to the anti-aircraft crews that were in pits. They let us go in the hangars where they had a few airplanes, the German Ju-88, civilian Me-109, I remember that. But there was no gas for them. They said they had no fuel. And then we'd walk around and come back. So they treated us good.
So you're basically just hanging out with German soldiers.
Yeah, we were, really, yeah. And I say they'd show us pictures of the relatives maybe in Detroit or Philadelphia or some other city. They all had relatives, and they could speak some English, because Germans were well-versed. They learned more than one language. They were way ahead of us Americans. I learned a little bit of Italian, but not much. And I knew a little bit of very little German because of my grandparents being German. But I couldn't sprechen die Deutsch like they could. But as I say, that was good. And then one day, this other fellow and I were out in the courtyard. They said it was around noon when we saw, looking out, we saw these tanks going by, which were American tanks. And then he and I walked by the guards, and he didn't stop us. I mean, they must have known, we didn't think about it at the time, but they must have known things were about up. And we went out there, and we watched all these Army tanks going by. And then pretty soon a Jeep came along with a captain, and we yelled at him, and he came over. We told him we had these Americans here, 19 of us. And he brought a big truck over, and he said, get on and tell them where to go in. So we got in and went around the gate and came in, got our crew together. Now the Germans gave us all our records that they had on us. So we brought them back with us. I say they treated us decent. And then we went, we split up and all were riding on these different tanks. And they went all day and night till they hit the Austrian border. The only time they stopped was the fuel. And then they'd stop and refuel, and then we cooked our canned dinners that they had on them. We put them on the engines of the tanks that would heat them up. And then they treated us good. These fellows were from the 10th Mountain Division, and some of them had been prisoners in the United States, had been released because they volunteered for service. They'd been all through Africa. They had been through a lot. And boy, they treated us royally. They gave us all nice jackets to wear because it was cold. This was April of '45. It was cold. And then the next morning when they set up at the border of Austria, they were set up their guns there to keep the Germans from retreating in Italy. And then they said we couldn't stay there. They gave us a truck and we had to go back. And we ended up in Verona, where we turned ourselves in there because there was all kinds of things going on there, all kinds of guns piled out in the streets. It was amazing to see all this weaponry. And they told us, oh, we had to wait for rides back in trucks. And then we got talking to some of the local soldiers there, and they told us how bad the roads were going back to where they were going to send us. They said tunnels had been all bombed out and that, and they said it was terrible. So for somehow or other, we got to the idea that wasn't for us riding in any more trucks, because we had just had a hair-raising ride down the mountains with a truck driver that scared me more than any of my missions. It's funny, but it's true. Boy, those guys drove like idiots. So anyhow, we walked to the edge of Verona there, and there was an airport, a British airport. We went in there, and I can't remember if it was a major or what he was. We talked to him. We told him what we had. He got us a plane and a pilot, and he flew us down to 15th Air Force headquarters in Bari, Italy. And we got in there that evening then, and I called my base, which was probably about 30, 40 miles from there. And the next morning they sent a 17 over to pick us up. So my crew, we all got in and went back to my own base. The other English crew, I don't know how they got back. They didn't come back with it. So I was back in time. The next day was VE Day. So we were back for a big celebration. So then it was just a matter of waiting to be sent back, because I couldn't stay there. My group at that time was flying missions up into Germany with supplies in it after the war had ended. So I missed out on all that. And then from there, they sent me back to Naples. And I met an old buddy of mine, and we had been all through training. He was in a different group, another pilot. And he and I, we stayed at this chateau up in the hills there the Army had. It was all nice mountain water coming in the bathtubs and everything, from the volcanoes, you know. And we were there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. Every day you go down and look for stuff on a bulletin board to see if you're going to either fly back or get shipped back. And so every day, if there's nothing doing, we'd go down into Naples. We'd rent a sailboat and go sailing and swimming and things like that. Or come back in the evening and to the officers' club there up in the mountains. We'd always meet a bunch of people, and I met all kinds of pilots, from British pilots and from mostly Australian, and they were a great group of guys. Oh, you couldn't call them, or you ever call them a limey, they'd get mad at you. Because, oh, we're not limeys, we're Australian, we're from there. And they were a nice bunch. So I did meet a lot of nice people from different countries there while I was in Naples. Then finally one day we got orders, we were going to come back by boat. So then we got back, we came back on, it was a Argentina, did I say, a liner that the Navy had use of, and we come back on a nice big boat. And we were, about 12 days coming back, but slow going in a bit. And then I come back in Virginia, and then from there I got a train home and surprised my parents because they didn't know I was back. And I walked in, they almost died because they didn't know.
They didn't know you were safe, right?
No, I don't think. No, I think they had gotten a telegram or something from the War Department that I was rescued. Right. But they didn't know I was back. When I walked in the doorway, I think my mother almost died. So I was always like that, though. I'd come home sometimes. I'd have a few days off. I could get away when I was in Columbus, Ohio, for my B-17 train. I'd take a train to Buffalo, and I'd walk in, and my brother or someone surprised. I'd be there for a couple of days. You could do a lot of things, you know, in those days.
The strange thing is that Mr. Frank, who was the principal of West Seneca High at the time, was announcing at the graduation that he was either lost or dead, and he was in the audience.
He didn't know that. So I surprised a lot of them. They were rid of me, but I wasn't. I come back to haunt them. And then I met you shortly after, didn't I?
Well, you came into the Greeks.
Yeah.
When I worked, making sundaes and sodas and all that good stuff. And then you were with Bill.
Yeah, and Bill's the one that fixed me up with a date.
You were taking Bill flying because he was in the CAPs. And he made arrangements that we were all going skating the same night. Skateland.
What was the Greeks? Where was that?
Right at the Seneca City line.
So now it would be...
I don't know what's there now. You know,
remember the Texas Red Hots?
Yeah.
Well,
the next
just
store,
the next store.
The next building.
Okay, I think it's an archery place.
I don't know. Then the next building was another
Great Crystal.
Cousins, first cousins owned one next to each other. But, well, Honeyland was Caucasus originally, and the next door was his first cousin, but his name was Cassius because when they came over, he didn't know how to say his name. When he said it, they left out one syllable, which was very common, and when the people came over from Europe in those days. So that was it.
Carol, what do you remember about being home or on the home front during the war? Like, what pops out to you memory-wise as being significant?
Actually, it wasn't pleasant because my brother was on the missing list. Every night, we only had radio at that time, and we all gathered around the radio every night. And Axis Sally, I believe was her name, and she would talk to the boys in the service and tell them she knew where they were going the next day on a mission. And she would name different names of boys that had been captured or whatever. We would sit there glued to that radio. Please let us hear something. But there was nothing. And many families had the same thing. Many families had 3 and 4 sons that never came back. There was, on Ludwig, you know how few houses, there were about 4 in a row with gold stars on the door, on their front windows and there. It was really sad, really sad. And I was younger. It didn't affect me that much because, I went through high school. We still had dances in the gym and basketball games and whatever. We had proms and whatever. Life went on. It was very sad for families that, had boys over there and didn't know anything or had bad news. It wasn't a good time. But this war is just as bad or worse. And the wars are good. And I'm glad none of you boys are at the age where you would be going. I thank God every day for that. I would hate to think at this point in your lives you would have to go through something as horrible as it is over there today.
It's worse today.
I'm a sentimental old fool, Joe, but family is the whole thing with me. I'm so proud of you. You know it. And John's going to catch on one of these days. He's just a slow learner. He's going to make it. Just takes more time.
You know what? I had another question. Grandpa, you mentioned your grandparents. Your grandfather spoke German. Is that
yes?
What were they like? Your grandparents?
Oh, he was real nice. He was killed in the early 30s. I was probably about 6 years old when he was killed. But he would sing me little German ditties and songs.
I don't know if you want that on tape.
Yeah, I won't put those on tape. Like my girl Nell was a devil out of hell, and the devil out of hell was she. She'd climb on a steeple and piss on the people, but she'd never piss on me.
No, don't show
Things
your
like
class.
But I mean, he had a lot of humor. He was humorous. And my grandmother's, boy, she was a sweet soul, real nice. My mother's mother was great, and they had a lot of tragedy in their lives, but they had taken more of their own daughters and back. My mother too at the time through things that happened in the family, and her one sister, her husband was killed over in Saccone, where they worked in a wax factory. It blew up one night there where they made wax. He was blown to bits. They never found anything in him. She and her three children came to live with my grandmother. I mean, they were that way. They took him in and helped, bring him up. No, I had very nice grandparents on my mother's side. My grandfather's side, I never knew my other grandfather. I knew his mother slightly. She lived about 1937, but she couldn't speak English. So when my father used to go down to her, I think he used to speak to her in Pig Latin, like I call it Pig Latin. It was this farmer, they'd say, ooh, 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 or, the way they make her understand. But that was it. And so I never, she was totally different. Now, my dad had a lot of brothers that lived down in the full family, and I got to know all my uncles very good, and they were a nice bunch. They were a lot of good fishermen. They had fished out in Lake Erie all the time, and they were all railroad. They worked for New York Central. One was a conductor, and the other one was worked at plumbing. They all had good jobs there and worked for the thing. My dad worked on some of the railroad once. He was a railroad policeman for a while until he got shot in the leg once. He's chasing guys out of boxcars and got shot. But he bounced around a million jobs too. But back in them days, it's the way of life. You grew up and, you know, they didn't have the education you do today. Boy, you don't realize how lucky I am or you are today, what chances you have and opportunities. You know. It was tough when they grew up. A different world.
Now, your father was the wrestler, is that correct? Or
He was what?
did he wrestle?
Oh,
yeah.
he was young.
Yeah. Your mom has pictures.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
He was probably 18, 19 when those pictures. He wasn't doing that then. No, not he was a lot older then.
Do you know where the hydraulics is down Seneca?
Just past Smith Street, it'd be on the left, it'd be called a
Wow.
Well, there used to be a
There.
sports club down there. When they were kids, that's where they all went. And they did wrestling and all sorts of, they were all boxers. My one uncle was great with boxing gloves, and he'd get beat up because he was the shrimp of the family, but he'd always get drunk and get beat up. But then the brothers would come rescue him. And all my other uncles were like Yukon Eric, the wrestler, if you ever heard of him. He was a big, heavy, they were all big barrel-chested guys. But they were a close family, you know. They were good. They were real good, my uncles.
But then the family fell apart.
Yeah, that fell apart, yeah. When their mother died, then things happened with it. It's
Like
caused
every
problems.
family. There's always one that gets it all, and then there's other ones that fight to get their share. And it doesn't happen, they don't speak to them. Don't ever get into anything like that.
True. I mean,
Yeah, it is
Sad.
important.
Sad.
seeing my father and his brothers argue over all those years, over whatever they argued over. It's taught me that lesson.
Yeah, that is sad, because they were a close family for so long, and then all of a sudden one didn't talk to the other one. I'm glad they're back now where they at least speak to each other. I thought that was not good.
Yeah, life's too short to stay, at odds. It isn't worth it.
Mm-hmm. Grandma, what about you? What about did you know your grandparents?
Mm-hmm. I never knew my grandfather. My grandfather passed away when my mom was about 9, 10. And my grandmother lived, well, till Shirley was born, which would have been 74 years ago. But originally, my great-grandfather came from Germany with the Shelkoffs and all these people that had money. And he must have had money when he came here, because they bought blocks of houses. Now, this is down in the First Ward where things were, but they bought a couple blocks of houses. And my grandfather and grandmother ran a grocery store down there that supplied the freighters with groceries and whatever that they needed. And things went great until my grandfather passed away. And then things were really bad for the people that lived there. They couldn't afford their rent. They came to my mom always said they came to the grocery store. They'd put 2 pennies on the table and take enough of everything to make soup. And my grandmother couldn't refuse them. They were friends and neighbors. You don't let them starve. And then my great-grandfather decided he wanted another wife after his wife died. So he sent to Germany for a wife. And she was a son of a gun. So they gave her a block of houses to get rid of her, if you can believe it. Things were different in those days. But I had a nice grandma, very nice grandma, the time that I knew her. And my dad's parents, my dad's father, but this is rare, being his name was Ham, H-A-M, and he choked on roast beef and died. So that was the headlines in the Buffalo paper. Ham died on roast beef. Now, people thought that was funny, but it wasn't funny. And he was a fisherman by trade. And my grandmother took in laundry, and she was a domestic, really. And then when she was a widow, and my dad was very young, he was 10, my dad went to 6th grade because he had to stop going to school and work to help his mom. And he worked in a barrel factory. You know, they used to make barrels in those. And when the inspector came, because he was little and he shouldn't be there, they would put him in one of the barrels and put the cover on. The inspector would go through the place and never look in the barrel, and that's how they never caught him. But even though he didn't have an education, my dad was a very smart man. And he, of course, like everybody, he had to take math classes and that. Courses, not in college, but through work, because he was an insurance man. And you know, the columns that you had to add up without adding machines in it, he could do that with no work. But we could never talk to him when he was adding the column up. And my brothers were older than I, but before I was born, they would be playing outside. And the one day, my brother Len, the younger one, came in, and he stood there while my dad counting up and up and up. After he got to the end, my father looked up and he said, "What is it?" And he said, "Bob just got hit with a car," and he's laying out in the street.
He waited though to the end.
My dad was wonderful. Your mom can tell her how good my dad was. He was really great. And he and Mr. Beals were the best pals fishing in that. So I had a good childhood. We had never lacked for anything. My dad worked hard. We had a nice house and always, you know, happy home.
Paul Beals' grandfather.
His grandpa would bring his boat over to the cottage on Saturday, and he and my dad would go out fishing. They would stay out all day and get tons of fish. In fact, I meant to bring that picture up of the two together with this big string of fish. Audrey sent us a copy, and I never thought to bring his, you know, this Lee's sister, not Paul's sister. And it's neat, but they came so many Saturdays, and boy, his mother, Mrs. Beals, could cook and bake. Oh, delicious stuff. And Lee had a nice mom and dad. But his mom passed away in Florida. They were just moving there. And I think she was cleaning. They had purchased a trailer and she was cleaning it. And she had an aneurysm in the brain.
When was this?
In Florida, in St. Pete's.
St. Pete.
When was it?
Pardon?
When was this?
Oh, boy.
I don't remember if Paul, I don't remember Paul ever talking about it.
Well, I don't know that he realized it. Oh, I'm trying to, you know, Shirley might know the year more than I would. Paul wasn't born yet.
Oh, okay, so Paul never knew his grandmother.
No, I don't think he knew his grandmother. I think he may have known his grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not positive about that. But he never knew. To my knowledge, he didn't know her. But she was a nice lady.
And she could cook.
Pardon me?
And she was the one who could cook really.
Oh, and bake. Oh. We'd be waiting for her to come on Saturday morning because she would be up probably 4 o'clock making these beautiful rolls and pies and all kinds of stuff to bring, because they were afraid to bring meat over the border at that time, coming into Canada. So she'd bring all these gorgeous desserts. And we would get up just as she's coming in about 9 o'clock, and we'd say, "Well, what did you bring for breakfast?" Would be a whole pan of cinnamon rolls or something. Oh, man. She was a great baker and all that.
And what was Paul's grandpa like? Lee's dad. This is who you're talking, Lee's dad, right?
Yeah, he was a hard worker, man, you know, and that almost killed him when Robert got killed working side by side with him.
Lee's older.
in the
older
paving business. It was Lee's older brother. But, you know, I before they started coming to the cottage, I really didn't know him. My sisters knew him very well because they lived on Ludwig, and, you know, we were married. But, you know, seemed like a nice enough man. And once he got over to the lake and he was retired and fishing and that, really nice. We liked him very much. And when he got sick, we used to go visit him. And then
Oh, in St. Petersburg.
in St. Pete's,
He
whatever,
didn't live too far away.
hospital or nursing home or wherever, we would try to make sure that we got over on occasion at least to see him and check on him. And then, of course,
Yeah, we'd go out for dinner together sometimes.
oh, that's when he was healthy.
Yeah,
oh,
when he was healthy. But I mean, he was like that.
I have to tell you this, and I'm sure that Paul doesn't know this, but he always used to have Buicks, and he bought a Chevy one time. And he was pulling up to a restaurant, and his foot slipped and went on the accelerator, and he went right into the restaurant. And so when we saw him, he said, "I never should have bought that car. I always go for General Motors." Well, the Chevy is a General. But, he showed us a lot of nice restaurants over there in St. Pete's, you know, because we'd go over even before he was sick. We would stop on occasion. And my mother and Shirley would, when my mom was alive, they would come down to visit us in Orlando and then go to visit the old neighbor from where they used to live in St. Pete's. And we'd always have to stop and see Mr. Beals and that. It was nice. Today you don't visit like the older people always made sure, you know. No, but they made sure. They made sure you visited, you know. We don't do that like we should. But I'm always so happy to get up here and see everybody up here. I miss a lot through from one year to the next. Your little guy, for crying out loud, was in a little basket last year, little tiny infant. Look at him now. I love his scream. It's cute.
I don't know. It tends to.
It's cute though. That's gonna go away just as quickly as it came. And he's not. He was a very good little boy. He didn't try to jump out of the chair or anything. He was very patient. That's a long time for a little fella to sit. He's
and
cute.
you're right. It does change. It does change very, very
He's
quickly.
cute. I think he's adorable. And that Quinn, he's the last word, that one.
I know he's.
The doll.
As he grows, he's going to be fun for you. He's so advanced to me. Everything I read about him when I go on your site, I mean,
Well, even what
I love it.
Kendall
I'm
would
telling
tell
you,
us.
it's really does. It's nice.
I love that.
I really stay in touch with things when I go.
Right. We love that car. Him driving his brother in the car. We thought that was so neat. That was adorable.
How you guys doing, by the way? Have we been talking for almost an hour? Are you?
We're still here.
Okay. Well, I don't want to talk your
know.
offer.
No, we're happy to be here, Joe.
Yeah.
Hopefully next year we can come back.
Yeah, I would hope so too.
We hope so. It's important to us. I couldn't miss Quinn's birthday.
Mm-hmm.
The family reunion, if I didn't get to it, I would have been a little unhappy. But not as unhappy as I would have been if I didn't get for Quinn's birthday.
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, I'm not going up there this year." I said, "Oh, yes, you are."
She drags me. She's the boss.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
I couldn't have married a nicer girl, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I wish I was a girl again.
So what's the secret? You guys been together for like
63
62 years?
Is that long enough?
Yeah, it's long enough. You got to know some sort of secret to
Not
She
really.
puts up with me, that's all.
And he puts up with me. You know. It's different.
Yeah.
And now who's around but the two of us anyway? And we're too old to go looking. Right?
Well, I can look, but wouldn't do any good.
I have now this doesn't
My
have
eyesight's
to,
not too
this
good.
doesn't have to be on record, but I have to tell you. Chip goes to Fort Lauderdale to this Hukilah every year, okay? And so this year, well, Kelly went also, and they had to take the baby. They asked us to come along to, like, there's things different nights and whatever, and we would stay in the motel room with the baby and get him into bed and that, and so they could go for a couple hours later than the baby would be up. Except for the night of the Hukila in the Mai Tai restaurant. The baby stayed up till 11:30 watching the show. His little eyes were bugging out of his head. So they had, Hawaiian dancers and all this stuff. So Grandpa's on the end, and Kelly went and got the hula hula dancer to come and dance for Grandpa. And Grandpa's, yeah, all right. I think they have pictures. I haven't seen them, but that would be funny.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Thank God.
And I said to Kelly, when your dad comes, why don't you take him there? And she said, oh, my dad would be so embarrassed. I don't think he would.
That was a great show, really.
It was very nice, very different. But it was funny.
Do you mind if I ask one more question?
No?
Is that cool? I just gotta find a good one. One sec, sorry.
You can edit all the things I said that don't pertain to anything.
Absolutely, absolutely.
He's a man.
I like West Seneca. I've lived here my whole life, or whatever. Yeah, you know what? That's probably a question for another time. I was just wondering, because you guys could probably talk on and on about this, but I'm just wondering, like, what it was like back then.
West Seneca.
Growing up, you mean?
Yeah, growing up. What was it like growing up in West Seneca? That's a long question, but I don't know if you have like
Really good. We had a lot of friends. We all had our own baseball team. Everyone in the neighborhood, we all belonged to the team in those days. We didn't have much. My brother was our manager of our ball club. We'd ride on his Model A. We'd be on the running boards and the rumble seat and go around over to Winchester and the different places to play ball. We had a great time. People were, I would say, poor in those days. It was rough days, but we had never lacked for anything. My dad always had a car. We were able to go places and do things. He took us all over different vacations in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan. We always went somewhere in the summer, So we had a good life, really. And
There was only one sad thing, and that was the educational system in West Seneca at the time when I was going there. You went from, Bellwood was from kindergarten to 12th grade. And when there was no guidance counselors or anything like that. And when you went in the first day of school, you went into the study hall. And all the different courses were on the board. And you would say to your friend, well, what are you taking? Oh, yeah, that sounds good. So you take that.
that's true. That happened to me,
And this
too.
is how it was. And then nobody said a word about, well, that's not the correct thing to take if you want to major in this or that. So when I took a year of Latin the first year, and then the next year I decided to take French. So I took 2 years of French, and then probably second and third year, and then now in my fourth year, everything has changed. You needed a 4-year major. You needed this. You needed that. Well, I had a year of homework and a year of this and a year of that. They let me graduate with English as my 4-year major. Now, that wasn't right. I got a Regents diploma and everything because I did, well in school, but I thought, this is horrible, that there's no guidance. Unless the family knew you were definitely going to college and the family laid out the courses for you, you just took any old thing. And they've come a long way, believe me. But then when Marcia went to school here, Marcia was going to be a music major, and she was going to go to Fredonia State, and they said you need 3 years of French to qualify to go to that school. So I made sure that she took the 3 years of French. However, these other kids that were majoring in sciences had 2 years of Latin, 2 years of German. And they came up and said, you need 3 years. Well, they're in their senior year with 2 of one and 1 of the other. They had to take 2 years of German in 1 year in order to qualify for the colleges and if you wanted to go into the sciences. I thought that was really bad. Mm-hmm. And then you had guidance counselors, but the state changed the rules or the college changed the rules or whatever. So that regent stuff is
sounds like it's
not, it changes too often.
Mm-hmm.
Now aren't they having difficulty passing the tests here?
Yeah, they are. They got rid of, because there used, like as you know, there used to be non-regents classes and regents classes, and more advanced kids would take regents, and they got rid of that, so all kids could take regents.
Oh, do they?
And that was the idea. But what they did was, they then lowered the bar for what regents was. They lowered the passing rate. They lowered they lowered the amount of questions you had to get right on like the biology exams in order to pass the exam.
Wow.
So they dropped those standards, and then now this kind of came out. I mean, it's always been known, but it came out that the commissioner of New York Education leaned on one of the testing coordinators to lower the grid even more. So it looked like kids were making all this progress, and in New York, no, they just fixing the books essentially.
You know, Antoinette taught 5th grade in a Buffalo school, and she was over like Broadway and whatever in that area, and most of the children had very little at home. They would tell you Uncle John stayed this week and next week this other one's staying, and she said she never learned so much as she did from these 5th graders. And anyhow, the majority of the class got about 60 at the end of the year for their final grade. And the principal said to her, you can't fail all those children, that's not possible. And she had to regrade to make more passing. Mm-hmm. Was that right?
I tell you, similar situations.
It's sad.
We'd be correcting Regents exam in groups at McKinley, and word from on high would come that we need to regrade some exams. It's a common thing. Hey, dude.
It's starting to rain.
Oh no!
Did he go to bed?
He's really tired, and John. And
he didn't go to bed yet.
Oh.
No,
he's waiting for Daddy.
He's been wanting to come in to help you.
Well, you guys come on. We're finished
I
up.
can't believe he didn't fall asleep. You had him swimming.
Yeah, I thought he was going to go to bed early.
Yeah, he probably could have. But you know what? Now he'll sleep in a little bit. And whatever.
Oh, okay. If you don't
God,
want
it's 20 to 10. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for...
thank you. We appreciate it.
Well,
nice
like I
talk.
said, just edit out anything for not pertaining to anything when I start talking.
Yeah, she can talk. That's why I said to her, now you talk, because she's the one that likes to talk. I'm the quiet.
Oh, yeah, right. You should hear him on the phone with this person that he just got his name and that he had not,
radio man.
He's about an hour and a half or 2 hours. I said, this is the guy.
He thought I was dead.
Are you still awake, sweetie?
He wants to help do the interview.
Oh, okay. Go on and sit down, buddy.
Do you have a question to ask?
Do you want to know something? Do you want to sit here?
Do you have a question?
I'll move and you and Mommy can sit here.
What did you want to know?
You want to sit on my lap?
Do you want to sit on Dad's lap at the computer?
What do you want to know, big guy? Yeah, come on in. I'm sorry. I didn't know everybody's...
Can you tell Daddy what grade you're going into?
What is that? What do you
That's a mic. We'll turn it over so you can talk.
Graham, are you rapping?
You talk. See, now you talk and then Daddy will show you. You talk.
What do you think, bud?
Tell us what you want for your birthday.
What do you want for your birthday?
Oh, just put it down, though, sweetie.
Well, I can reach from there.
Oh, well, you don't have to be too close or go.
Yeah, you're making real loud noises.
We won't hear you.
Birthdays, parties.
Sure.
Yeah, you have to.
What do you want for your birthday?
I can't tell you. It's a surprise.
Well, then we won't know what to get you if you don't tell us what to get you.
How about a spanking?
Let's sit this right here.
How about space?
You want spanking for your birthday?
How about a space?
We go
1, 2, 3,
5 of
4,
them.
5. We get extra ones for tomorrow. One more day. Yeah. But can you tell Daddy what grade you're going into?
What day?
You tell me when you go to school, what grade are you going into? Remember? What you
This,
remember yesterday you told us you're going into first grade? Remember that?
this year?
First grade.
What, where?
Grade.
What grade are you going to in Allendale? What are you going to be in? What class are you going to be in?
Allendale.
Where?
Great.
Where?
Allendale.
He's gonna go to high school. And go to Daddy's school. Is that right?
Doogie Howser.
Can you do that? Can you go to high school, to Daddy's school? No? What grade do you have to go to?
What, where? What is that thing?
At Allendale. What are you going into?
Aren't you going to be in kindergarten? That's what we're trying to know.
No, he told me yesterday because tomorrow I'm going to first grade.
Nope, leave it right there. You can talk. It'll pick up your sound right there.
See?
Go bah. Bah.
Say, give me money tomorrow.
Do you like money?
What do you do when great
What
grandma
do
sends
you
you
do with money?
when great grandma sends you $5 in the cards for the holidays? What do you do with your $5?
Ooh, looks like we're going to have to cut some
Like
fingernails.
my Uncle
He
Beer.
goes bowling.
But we better check and see.
Wow.
He takes his $5 and goes. We go to this one restaurant called the Warehouse, and they have bowling for kids.
Oh,
And he
good.
bowls
Oh,
every
bowls?
time he can. Oh, we can go to the warehouse. Is that what you do with it?
I thought I had a
Oh
five.
boy, I only got 20s.
I know.
You
I
go
had
over there.
I had a five.
I don't know. I don't like
So I'm gonna toss this Jello.
Alrighty, what you want to do?
Wow.
Get that done.
Yeah, that's good.
Alright, we'll see you guys
It was in
tomorrow.
there for too long.
Yep. You didn't eat it. You didn't like the greens.
Pay you well for your,
Quinn,
pay you
I
well
had
for your
some-
information.
Great grandma was gonna give you something. I think
You
you
got
can
something,
use at the
something
warehouse.
for you.
What's great game you got for you?
Well, I'm gonna
I
put
guess
it.
you
I'll
don't
give it
get
Uncle
it.
John.
Take
I'll
it.
put up. See, Uncle John's gonna take it.
Mine. Mine.
See this one. You
Mine.
know what this one is?
Mine.
What's that one? Yeah.
$10.
What do you say?
Just like the warehouse.
Beer money.
What do you
How
say?
about Bobby?
He says they cheaper.
What? Say thank you.
Hey, Quinn. Quinn. Beer money.
Beer money.
Oh.
What do you do at the warehouse? What do you do there? Do you swim? Do you swim at the warehouse?
I think she's trying to bribe you so she can come to your party.
No, I can't. I'm old. She told me I can't come.
Bone.
Well, he kept saying, I want to go and